Hey, welcome back, everyone. I'm Daniel from GregoMusicStudio.com. This is Greg from GroupLessons.com. And in this video, we're going to be talking about online group lessons. And to help us dive into that topic, we have brought Carly Rawlings Rivera on the podcast with us. And Carly, we have kind of a special connection because you are actually teaching my son and have been for a while. So, between the podcasts and videos I do for Grow and GroupLessons.com, we have a lot of guests on, but I feel kind of a special connection because you've been instructing my son for the past couple of years, which I want to say thank you for.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is that you're in a very, very unique position from my perspective. And that is that you have been teaching group lessons for a long time. And you taught group lessons in the context of using the Piano Express in a live classroom, but then you moved to online lessons. And so I think you're in a very unique perspective. You have a very unique perspective on the differences there. So maybe just to begin with, give us the 1 to 2 minute bio, just so people can kind of begin to know who you are.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I will start with 5 years ago, I graduated college and I was looking for my first teaching job out of school. And I really was interested in Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. metro area. And I came to this area, I found Greg. Greg hired me and I started to teach group classes. And then I taught private students of the graduates of the group classes in private lessons. And just a quick fun fact, I met my husband first day on the job. Greg happened to schedule us on a Tuesday. We just celebrated our 3-year wedding anniversary yesterday. So.
Whoa.
Congrats.
I didn't even know that.
Yes. Corey and Carly.
Yeah.
Wow.
They met here.
So
it was matchmaking.
I look at my life. In the past 5 years of my life would look totally different, both professionally and personally without Piano Express.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, no doubt. I did not know that Corey worked for Greg. I can't believe I've gone this long and didn't realize that fact. So Greg's been playing matchmaker more than one time in terms of
well,
just...
Corey was there from the very beginning, or at the very beginning stages too. So he's
cool.
been along the journey.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, for the sake of, I guess, brevity, obviously we're not doing like a demo of the Piano Express in this interview. And I'm going to assume that if someone's watching this, they're somewhat familiar with the Piano Express system, some of the things that make it really, really unique as a group lesson curriculum. Obviously, there's a lot of advantages to it and things that really have never done before in group instruction. Carly, what I think would be really interesting would be to talk about the transition between teaching Piano Express in a classroom and then teaching it online and kind of how you made that transition or what even prompted that transition.
You'll never guess. It was the pandemic. So Greg and I were working together in person, and then the pandemic happened. And I remember Greg calling me up, and he told me, you need to go buy this hybrid grand piano that I have, because the pandemic was happening and we didn't know what the future looked like. And I remember Greg and I working a lot of extra hours outside of classes, trying to figure out what do online group classes look like. And it was a lot of trial and error. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I hated it for the first month or so.
Wow.
But once we settled into a groove and I started to realize, the sky's the limit and what we could do here, and just started to learn the tools better, I fell in love with it. So it was the pandemic that brought about that change.
Interesting. Greg, do you have anything to add to that?
It started with, of course, some concerns. People were concerned about. We started getting a few phone calls like, hey, our kids are going to drop out of classes. There was everyone was hand washing. It was on the news. And then all of a sudden, when public schools closed, our studio was expected then to close. And it was a scramble. I talked to our developer, the guy that was writing the software for the Piano Express in-person classes, because we already had a lot of good technology. I talked to him about we need to be able to put our piano on a screen. We need to be able to push keys and have them light up, and just little tools so that when we have these online classes, we can have more control over what we see and what we hear, because every teacher that went from in-person to online remembers, those early days of Zoom. There was a lot of latency, a lot of things that we used to be able to do, playing along with the students in real time. There was like these delays, and it's just like, this doesn't work. Oh no. And so we needed to depend more on visual, for real time than auditory. I was communicating with Andy. He was building these tools. I was training Carly. And for a while, we were all teaching online lessons. I can't say that I ever hated online lessons, not even at the beginning, but I always preferred in person. I was always like, okay, we got to get through this, and I've got to get back to in person. But I know Carly and so many other teachers in this country and in this world were like, wait a minute. Online lessons are a better fit. This is what we're going to stay with. And so we're really happy that there was like happenstance that really drove us to make these tools so that online lessons work. Because online lessons now, they're not going away. They're going to be around for the long haul.
Yeah. Carly, so you're a convert. You went from hating it to, I know you're still working for Greg now, but you also have your own studio that you're using the Piano Express tools with. Tell me what prompted that change for you. How did you go from hating it to choosing to take that path permanently?
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe hate is a strong word. I will say I tend to be resistant to change. And for me, developing a process and then doing it over and over again where I can fine tune it and make it better each time. I think I see a lot of value in that. And when something changes so suddenly and I just feel like I don't even know what to do, that was the challenge in that for me. I would say because the pandemic lasted longer than a 12-week cycle of the curriculum, I got more repetitions and I started to be able to fine tune the process and then just doing it day in, day out and really dedicating a lot of time and energy and focus to get a setup that worked well for teacher and student.
Interesting. So maybe go.
I will say her setup, because I've visited her apartment. I haven't been to your new house, and congrats on that new house, by the way. But I've been to her apartment. Her setup is, I have setup envy. She's got like the overhead camera and the side camera, and like this little button you push off to the side that like changes camera angles at the touch of a button. Yes, like a little controller there. That little thing, that is wizardry. So, anyways, yeah, she's got some gear. Her husband Corey, he's a bit of a tech genius, so he like sees like, okay, these pieces can get put together, and so she's got a pretty smooth setup there.
Carly and I have been talking about perhaps doing a second video, like MTV Cribs style, like of looking at the setup only. But that's probably going to be in the future. Carly, what I would love to hear from you right now is, what does a typical day of lessons look like for you? A day of group lessons with Piano Express. Could you maybe just walk us through like what that experience is, just as a teacher, and how you feel about that? I'm curious what comes to mind.
Sure. So the way my schedule is right now, I'm still working with private lesson graduates of the group class program. And so my schedule is, I have some private lessons, I have some group classes, and they are all scheduled together there. So normally a day starts off, mid-afternoon or so when students are available. And I will start that chunk of classes. I schedule them back to back in hour-long slots, similar to how Greg does. And I hop back and forth between an advanced private lesson to a gold level group class to, level 7 or CM private lesson to a purple class, based on the enrollment I have, based on the number of students I have in each class and their availabilities.
Okay. When you're in one of the group classes, how does that hour feel? Like, what are you doing during that time to support? Do you see up to 6 kids at a time?
I would say my sweet spot of where I feel I can provide the best service is 3 to 4, but I would not cap it at 4. If I have somebody interested in that class, I would allow up to 6. But generally that 3 to 4 has been a sweet spot for me.
Nice. And then just how does that hour feel? What are you doing during that time? Could you just describe that? Because I think a lot of people struggle to think about how an online group class would work. And obviously there's different ways of doing group, but since we're talking about Piano Express, let's talk about how you're doing it with that tool.
Yeah. Well, I was trained by Greg in the classic Piano Express style. So I have found that to work just as well in the group setting. And I will say I have taught multi-levels at once, and I have taught single levels at once. And that was due to scheduling and enrollment. And for both of those, I still kept the same format as the student enters the class. And then the first 30 minutes is assessment, working with the app, working to pass their songs. I float in and out. So something I forgot to mention is I actually use the breakout room function on Zoom.
On Zoom?
And
Okay.
I call it a practice room. That just sounds nicer to me than a breakout room. And I found without that feature, students were getting easily distracted by hearing their peers work, hearing me talk to other students. But if I have students in a breakout room, they can practice with the app, and I come in and out of their room, and there's a button they can ask host for help. I call it the help button. I think of it as a red flag at Piano Express in that big room where somebody is raising their flag for a question, and they hit that button and right there. So the first 30 minutes is the assessment portion, and the second half is the discovery, where we are working with the worksheet. And I have found no matter what happens, always start with finger drills, always end with the hear it section, the game. And, the bookends of that structure is amazing. And of course, we fill the lesson with the rest of the lesson plan.
Do you use breakout rooms when you're doing the discovery, or do you bring everybody back to the front?
Thank you. I bring everybody back together for the group class, or for the worksheet portion, including if it is a multi-level group. I try to keep everybody at the same portion of the worksheet at once. And I will work with certain colors. So say that, I have 2 gold students and 2 silver. I would talk to the gold class, help them with their finger drills, get them going on their finger drills, while I then go get the silver going on finger drills. And then we would go through the different portions of the lesson plan, staying in sync. One thing I do think can be nice about working with groups, multiple levels at once, is it previews to younger students what is to come. And it also can serve as a review for students that have already graduated out of a level. So we've made it work, and it's been a lot of fun.
I never thought about that, but yeah, that's how one room schoolhouses always worked. You never forget what you learned in 3rd grade because you hear it every year.
I will say right now, my classes have leveled out to everybody being at the same time in the same color. And that is what I am most accustomed to. So that feels seamless. It's less hopping around as a teacher. If you're working with multiple levels at once, you're thinking about, okay, this lesson plan said this lesson plan said that. But as you use the curriculum, I feel like it becomes more a part of you. You can speak the language. And again, as you have all these repetitions throughout the 12-week cycle and over again throughout the quarters, it becomes easier to move around if needed between levels.
Carly, how has it felt? How would you describe the difficulty level of working with kids online and helping them get results? Does that feel easy to you? Does it feel hard? I'm curious how you'd answer that question.
Daniel, it's a good question. I feel like I'm blessed with really good students. One of them being your child. And so I will say there have been students that I did not feel they were making the same type of progress online that they could in person. Therefore, they've gone back to Greg. I've had other students that have continued online and have been able to have just as successful results based on the teaching and the tools that we're providing.
What do you think the difference was between those two kinds of students?
I think maturity of students has something to do with it. So majority of my group classes have been older students. I've had some older ones. I would say level 3, 4, 5, 6.
So it's not so much an age; it's a level that you think of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think students, as they gain fluency with music and piano and note reading and rhythm, and then they also start to become more familiar with the tools of the app and the software, and even being able to, work through the mechanics of starting their Zoom call or, leaving their breakout room, going to the main session. All of those things, students get better with that time, and it becomes more natural to navigate those.
I think that one of the differentiators, because I've taught both as well. I've done plenty of online group classes and in person. And I think that there are certain students where it feels like there's more accountability for that student to focus and be engaged in the class when you are in the physical room with them. Sometimes when there's a screen between some students, not all students, but some students, whether it's easily distracted or maybe they're just not completely convinced that they're bought into piano. Some students are taking piano, but their level of interest is on a spectrum between I love this and I'm not interested. Those students, they're a little bit harder to engage, and you can't, of course, reach through the screen. I think when I was teaching online, that was one of the biggest challenges, is a student who you can tell is struggling to engage with wanting to learn piano, And I think even with the best students, there's moments where students are like, oh, this just feels like hard work. I don't know if I'm into it today. For me, that was the most difficult thing is trying to figure out how to get those students engaged. Carly, I wanted to know, have you sensed that? And what have you been able to do? Have there been any times where you've seen that turnaround? Have you been able to help students find the love for piano in your classes?
Yeah, I honestly want to put it on the parents a little bit, because I think the learning environment of where the piano is located and how much the surrounding environment respects that hour-long class, that does contribute a lot to the success.
Wow, yeah.
And I've had students that there's a lot of chaos going on. That's their life. That's what they're dealing with. And it may not be a good option for them. But I've had other students, say even homeschoolers, who are accustomed to online classes, and just parents that are really involved, engaged in the students' progress, and parents that are making sure that the computer's working right and the piano turns on, all of that stuff. The question about the turnaround, so students can get bored with redundancy. And the thing is, you need review. And the more repetitions you have on something, it can help the student learn it. But I think there's also a balance of every time I teach a lesson, I'm thinking about, is there anything I can do different this time that would bring a little spark of excitement? Whether it's an illustration or students doing something, I've had students get up and we're going to march to this beat, or things like that, to have them feel it themselves outside of just a screen. I try to be available outside of class. Students have my contact info. If they have questions, I will, as soon as possible, send them and answer their questions. I also, since I have the overhead camera plugged in, ready to go, I can easily make demo videos. And there's times I've even done demo videos with a metronome and all of this is in conjunction with the tools that are already in the app.
Right.
Carly, I'm curious. There are folks undoubtedly who are watching this that do online lessons, perhaps one-to-one. There could be interest in doing group. They're already familiar with online. And I'm sure, no doubt, there are folks that would be watching this that have not done online lessons at all. My question for you would be, what best practices, what would you recommend? What have you learned doing this? What are some things that you think could be really helpful to one or both of those groups? Any thoughts on that? I know I'm putting you on the spot there, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share what I've learned, and I'm also still learning. And so that's something that I'm trying to keep learning. How can I improve online lessons? Because it's constantly evolving. So I have found I've always had, I would say, humbly, a decent ear for hearing things, but with online lessons, if my view is obstructed of like the student's angle or they're having like a camera issue, I have to depend much more on my ear of like, are they playing the right note? And I can tell that my listening skills have really improved with online lessons. Again, I said the practice rooms, the breakout rooms feature, that's really helpful for the group class setting. As Greg has told me many times, you have to be prepared for a class, and being prepared for a class is how you can have the best control of the class. And so Greg has super great ideas and methods of class control for in-person, but I've had to think, how can I apply those same elements of class control on an online setting? And so for me, that structure of the breakout rooms and even mute buttons, I keep everybody muted. And I ask them, for a volunteer to demonstrate, they'll raise their hand and I ask them to unmute. So that way, that's how I keep the order of not having 6 pianos all playing at once and the sound going in and out.
I needed a mute button for one of my classes last night.
Oh, really?
One of my in-person, I was like, I wanted to mute one of my, he was just interrupted. I'm jealous.
Like, I don't have red cards and yellow cards, Greg. But that works amazing in your setting. I will ask, the mute button can sometimes be cumbersome in terms of it taking time of say that we're playing at the very end of class, the hear it game. And if I were to ask everybody, what number do you hear? And then somebody raises their hand and then I'm like, okay, let's unmute. And then they tell me and then I mute them and I'm like, no, that's the wrong answer. That adds a lot of time. One thing I found, I just tell the students, show me your finger numbers. What number did you hear? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And at the camera, I'm seeing like the finger numbers, and that's a way to get through that more seamlessly. I have students raise their hand, if they have a question. So at this point, I'm not talking as much about the assessment, but more of the discovery when we're all in the class together. I ask them to raise their hand. Occasionally, I'll have students send me a message. So say that a student is feeling maybe nervous or self-conscious or confused on a concept, but they might feel nervous to be like, Miss Carly, I don't get it. Sometimes I'll have a student send me a message. They'll be like, I don't understand that, or I just had a glitch. Can you say it again? So I will keep an eye on that. Like, nobody's sending me these huge long messages, but just a little, or I got to go to the bathroom. I've had that message come up several times too. I spotlight my video. So, with my overhead camera, I use the spotlight feature in Zoom. And I am super accustomed to hopping back and forth between like the main face camera angle and the overhead camera angle. So I use that spotlight feature a lot. I make demo videos and I try to follow up outside of class as needed just to continue the engagement. Like if I feel like a student is struggling or having a hard time, I will try to follow up. And I will say, just as an online teacher, you have to be prepared to help with tech issues inside and outside of class. Sometimes it's a quick, let's adjust your audio settings. Other times it might be a bigger issue. So if it's a larger issue, I might ask to meet with a student 10 minutes after class, or whenever works for them. Yeah. Probably the biggest thing I've learned as an online teacher, because I am running, I didn't tell you about my setup, but I am running multiple camera angles and OBS software. I have an audio interface. There's a lot of different connection points of all the different cables and all. If I don't restart my system before a block of classes, I'm more likely to have glitches. So I just always do a quick restart, and generally things run really well.
That's awesome. Greg, I'm curious.
Okay.
You've been teaching online lessons as well. I'd love for you to jump in because I know Carly gave a lot of wisdom right there. I'm curious if there's anything else that you would add to that. Best practices, hacks, those sorts of things.
Well, I think of the three of us, I would definitely default to Carly for the highest level of expertise. But I would just say with all group lessons, one of the most important things is that you manage time well. And I remember going into in-person group lessons way back in 2008, between 2008, 2012, when I was really trying to put the Piano Express together for the first time. managing time was a huge concern of mine. And it was one of the reasons why we developed the software the way we did, was to help gamify for students, manage time for teachers. When I went into online lessons, that was a whole new concern again. And I was just like, how are we going to manage time? And I found in a lot of ways, after I got into the rhythm of teaching online group lessons, in some ways, time management was easier. Going from person to person was a click of a mouse instead of walking from one side of the room to the next. I mean, 4 steps takes a few seconds, but that times 10, times every hour, times every day, times every, all these, it adds up, and being able to do simple things like put students in breakout rooms, mute, unmute. I would really say, to any teacher watching this who hasn't tried group lessons or online lessons before, and you're thinking, I don't know if it would work. I think I had those same thoughts and feelings, but you get into a good system, you start using it, and it does work. And there's really nothing to be afraid of. And I always measure everything by results, right? If you're not getting good results, then it's not working. If you are getting good results, then it is working. And, Carly said it best. She says she's been blessed with good students. Her students are good students. And Carly, I think it's okay to look in the mirror and say, part of that is because you're a good teacher. But if you look at all those results and say, it's all working, then the system works. The teachers, the students, the Piano Express method, the online format, group lesson format works.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is just adding on, but something, or just adding on to what you said there, Greg, but something I've said is, over the years, I've had a lot of people that I've worked with and helping them convert to group lessons. And I've asked them what frustrations they've had around teaching. And a lot of people said, or frustrations around marketing. And they said, well, I want to market in such a way that I only get really good students. Mm-hmm. And I've always said, we make good students.
Yes.
You don't put an ad out and get good students. We have to create them. And
right.
I think earlier in my career, I wouldn't have understood that. But after I got much more comfortable in the group environment and just becoming a better teacher overall, being more economical with my words, believing in the students, having a vision for what was possible, teaching got really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything to wrap us up, Carly? I know you told me before we started that you had a lot to say, and I've asked you certain questions, but there might be something that you were hoping to talk about or share. Maybe we could end on that note. Is there anything that you feel like you'd like to add in here?
Okay. Yeah, I would say you had asked what are best practices for teaching Piano Express in general.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I would say, given that I've taught both in person for Greg and then, independently online for my own studio, I would say you need to be prepared, study the material, class control, and then here's the biggest one. You just got to relax and have fun. And one thing I found, work is work and work has challenges, but when I'm teaching my classes, they bring me so much joy. The students bring me joy. It's like I get lost in that moment of what I'm doing. And my hope is that using a curriculum that, has these results that we're talking about, it's tried and true, with the way students are able to keep time and read music and quickly adapt. My hope is that they would be able to sense the passion and excitement that I feel because of this curriculum I'm using. And then they could experience that same joy and love in their own musical journey.